Hello and welcome. Remember back when you used to get DVDs? Does anyone actually get DVDs anymore? I don't know. Anyway, there used to be extra bonus stuff on the DVD, and I'm starting to see this extra bonus stuff on streaming services now as well. And sometimes one of the bonuses was the director's cut, with commentary by the director and sometimes the actors. Well, I decided to do the same thing for the final episode of the S series here on the Hospital Construction channel. In this case, of course, I'm the director, I'm the cameraman, I'm the editor, I'm the chief cook and bottle washer, basically. But I'll call it the director's cut just to follow in that tradition. In this episode, I'll be doing some commentary and also provide a little bit of additional material that wasn't in the original. Not a lot of new material, but some. I would suggest that you watch the original version first so that you can see it as it was intended, my original artistic vision, without being interrupted by me rattling on, the music obscured and so forth, but that's up to you. In the bottom right, you'll sometimes see a blue doohickey when I have significantly changed the episode, such as adding something, which is why you see a plus there right now. Or sometimes I may slow it down, pause it, whatever, so I'll put a little indicator down there just to show what's going on and to highlight that this is different from the original. Anyway, without further ado, let's get started. I had a little bit of fun with the opening on this episode. As it says at the bottom, this is starting out in South Lake Tahoe, actually just across the border in Nevada, in the obligatory casino area that exists in most Nevada border areas. You can tell this was recorded fairly recently by those gas prices. This was recorded back in May of 2022. This is a super fast, mondo fast drive lapse. Here's a map that shows the actual route that was taken. I cut out all the stops along the way, including a stop in Folsom for some dim sum for lunch. It goes by pretty fast, but I suppose if you were to go frame by frame, you could see some nice scenery in this video. Eventually, when I have the time to do it, I'll be making a slower, more proper version of this drive lapse over on my other channel called Party of the Third Part. I do that sort of stuff over there and other things too. Alright, we've left the mountains. We're in the Central Valley of California, Sacramento, that area, kind of the most boring part of the drive. No offense to the people who live there. Now we've entered the Bay Area. Crossing the Bay Bridge, entering San Francisco, past the Bill Graham Auditorium, and there's our building. Now we finally reached the usual sort of opening that these episodes usually have. The CPU really heats up while rendering this portion with all that stuff going on. I'm sure everyone carefully reads every single word of all that text on there, don't you? Of course you do. Just one of the interesting aspects of this building is the open area down here on the corner. I don't know how much architects think of such things, but that's obviously an open invitation for homeless people, street people, whatever, to hang out, especially at night, which already started happening before the building was completed. I wouldn't be surprised to someday see some sort of wrought iron gate or enclosure here. We'll see if that happens. Looks like somebody has put some religious graffiti there, signed RW. I don't know what RW means, maybe their initials, but looking around on the internet, there are all sorts of religious-oriented meanings for RW, so whoever wrote that wasn't specific enough. I don't know what RW means, but anyway, it's all going to be covered up pretty soon. You can also see there some tracks that somebody left already in the prior coat of sealant. I think this was sealed once before. I didn't catch that part, and somebody tracked through it. Notice the temporary wooden fence on the right. That gets removed because the planter was put there as sort of a block between the elevated sidewalk and the lower part. Unfortunately, I didn't capture that being removed. I just looked one day and it was gone, and I didn't happen to have any cameras pointed right there, so such is life. One of the many things I didn't capture during this series. Wait a minute, before he puts the tape back up, here's another transgression that I missed in the original version, so here's an added clip for the director's cut, something that I missed in the original version of this episode. Something else not included in the original version of this episode, here we see them coming out, but let's go back and take a look at the same two guys before when they went in, just in case you are wondering what they brought in, but more interestingly, notice that when they arrived, they do go around, but not when they come out. They didn't go around when they came out. Interesting. In this next section, they're finishing out the planter, putting in the soil, plants, irrigation system, and so forth. Not exactly the most scintillating video ever. You can't see much due to the angle of our view, but I put it in the episode anyway. I don't really have much to say about this portion, so we'll just let it go for a while and listen to the funky music. Coming up here is a place where I got a little too aggressive with the editing in the original episode, and I accidentally cut out something I was intending to point out. Stopping right here, we just saw the clock transition back there where we entered this new clip. There's actually something before this point in the clip that I had originally intended to point out, but messed up and left it out. So let's reverse this clip back before the original beginning, going back into a part of the clip that got left out of the original episode. And this here is the guy that I wanted to point out. It appears that Santa Claus is passing by, incognito, undercover, hoping not to be noticed. You know, when you're famous, sometimes you have to use a disguise when you go out about your normal day-to-day activities out in the world, not to be noticed. Or so I'm told anyway. Let's let it go forward a few frames, and sure enough, that's Santa. It turns out that Santa must be spending some time hanging out in our neighborhood. I went back and looked through some of the video, and he can be seen strolling back and forth a few times during the day. Here's some video from earlier on the same day where he can be seen sauntering by early in the morning. It appears that Santa is a smoker. I never knew that. Okay, let's get back to the original clip. I don't know if anyone notices such things, but there's a little bitty editing mistake here. Since it is paused, that was supposed to say 0x up there. Oh well, seems like pretty much every episode has at least one mistake somewhere, and as mistakes go, this certainly isn't the worst one to ever fall through the cracks. Coming up here, it's not really that noticeable in the original episode because it goes by so fast, but this woman stops to have some sort of very animated discussion with the workers. Of course, I couldn't hear what was said, but after she left, the workers obviously talked to each other and chuckled about it, so something was going on there, but I have no idea what. I couldn't really think of anything clever to have her be saying in the video, add a speech bubble or anything, so I didn't dwell on it in the original episode. This seems like a good place to point out something. When this episode was recorded, most of the work is all down in the same area, right there in front of the building. So often what happens is that there are multiple things going on in close proximity, but I want to show them one at a time because I usually want to divide the video into chapters with each chapter focusing on one particular type of work. Here's a case where they're busy working on the planter in the upper right. But down in the lower left, there's actually another crew working on the pavers by the street, which I wanted to show separately, and we'll actually see that later in Chapter 4. So this shot is all zoomed in, although you can still see a hint of them working down in the lower left. If I were to zoom out here from what was in the original version, we can see that they're actually working pretty close together. But through the magic of editing, I concentrated on one of them now, and I'll concentrate on the other one later in Chapter 4. Just a little editing note from the director here in the director's cut. When I was originally creating this episode and I saw what was happening down there, I thought, no way, that can't really be happening. I assumed they weren't really leaving tracks in the paint. It must be dirt or dust or something like that. I was kind of half joking here when making this episode. However, when I went down there just a little while ago and took a closer look, sure enough, there are indeed some tracks in the paint. Here are a few photographs taken about 5 months or so later from when the video for this episode was originally recorded. It's a little difficult to see, what with the way the lighting is, the color of the paint, and the dirt and debris that's accumulated, but if you look closely, you can see some tracks. Perhaps not as much as it looked like originally, like they were going to be, but there are definitely some tracks there. If I enhance it by cranking up the sharpness, maybe they stand out just a little bit more. Here are a couple close-ups showing places where the tracks are particularly noticeable. While we're paused here, there's an editing topic we can discuss. This sort of thing doesn't happen often, but it happened here. The strip on the right showing the entryway is zoomed in greatly from the original recorded video, and because it is so zoomed in and zoomed in on a dark area, the noise in the video signal is quite noticeable. So I applied a denoising filter to it. The strip on the right now shows what the original zoomed in video looked like without that filter. The problem with denoising software, and a reason why it isn't used too often, is that in addition to removing the noise, it also removes some of the detail, making the video look softer or blurry as if it had less resolution. In this case though, I thought the denoising helped a little to see the tracks better, so I did it. But it's not something that I do very often, it's just in certain cases where it's appropriate. This chapter ends with a view of the finished planter with the temporary fence removed. In case you are wondering what's going to be on the ground floor of the building in the background back there, I had originally heard that it was going to be a restaurant. However, it turns out it is actually going to be one of those concierge medical places, members only with private doctors, that sort of thing. Since this was the last episode of the series, I tried to throw in a couple of the old favorite music clips, the old standbys that were prevalent in the early episodes, and this is one of those. For the most part I used instrumentals, although sometimes I threw in some music with vocals. I used the instrumental version of this song, but it also has a version with some vocals. The vocal version, I don't know, it just didn't appeal to me that much and didn't seem to go with the video, so I didn't use it, but here I'll swap in the vocal version for a while and you can see what you think. Here's another case where in the original episode nothing occurred to me to have the guy with the clipboard be saying, another case of that. I really should have tried harder, I guess I just wasn't at the top of my game when I was doing that episode. However, we're in luck because here in the director's cut I can finally reveal what exactly he was writing on his clipboard. By the way, we're going to return back to the original music now. Note the guy wearing a sleeping bag in the background there. Interesting choice of fashion attire. During this entire series, just by virtue of having multiple cameras recording all day, as you know if you've ever watched many of the episodes, every now and then I'll catch something odd or interesting going on down there on the street. I don't even include them all, actually. It has occurred to me that I could probably make a series just recording what people are doing down on the street. Various happenings, characters walking by, whatever. But I don't know, it sounds a little creepy, so I probably will not ever do that. I'm thinking, though, of maybe making a compilation video of all the various characters and happenings that did appear in the episodes. I may get to that someday, we'll see. Something obviously missing in the original episode. I really should have imagined what he was writing down on his clipboard here. As astute commenter James noted, you're supposed to hold the pizza flat, not hold it like that. When you are watching the original episode, assuming you did, you may or may not have noticed that here at the end of Chapter 2, in the background, there appeared to be some sort of transaction or interaction of some sort going on between the guy in the street and the guy in the car. So I wanted to zoom in as much as I could and try to see what's going on there. Now, I can't tell for sure, but it does appear that this was a prearranged meeting. This guy walks up here and appears to be waiting for someone. I suppose it could have been a random stop. I don't know, but it looks to me like it was a prearranged meeting. They shake hands, and the guy gives him his card, it looks like. Discussing something here, but I'm not sure what. Then it looks like he's showing the guy a watch. So I'm thinking maybe he's trying to sell this watch. This guy is like some kind of mobile jewelry salesman or something. I don't know. The guy doesn't seem to want it though. But he says, wait a minute, I've got other stuff here, so don't run away. Quality merchandise right here in my car. Looks like he's actually got multiple watches because he pulls all these boxes out. Now he's got the bag. And it looks like maybe this is perfume or aftershave or something because he sprays some on the guy's hand and he checks it out. This guy's got everything. Doesn't seem like the guy's particularly interested though. So eventually they part their ways and I guess no sale was made. The guy in the car sits there for a little while, and it looks like he tries to engage someone else off the street. But that person doesn't seem to be particularly interested, so eventually the guy in the car gives up and goes away, I guess. Off to ply his wares somewhere else. As we saw earlier, before we sidetracked into checking out the mobile merchant there were a number of firsts for the new sidewalk ramp. Well, there are a few that got left out of the original episode, so here's the extended portion of that. Here's the first person to press the button. That button doesn't actually cause anything to happen, other than playing a message for disabled persons. I don't know whether he thought he accomplished anything by pressing that button. Here's the first bicycle to use the new ramp. Of course, in most situations in San Francisco, it is illegal to ride a bike on the sidewalk. But as we know, traffic laws are quite often ignored by bicyclists, so that's just the way it is. And lastly, here are the first small children to use the new ramp. I did a fair amount of blurring and obscuring here in case one of their friends finds this video on YouTube. I don't want to cause them any trouble from their peers or anything like that, or even if they themselves find it later, years from now, whatever. Most of the time, the cameras that are recording during this series are on tripods or mounted in some way, most of the time not handheld, so they're fairly stable. Even so, they still move. The building moves, a giant truck goes by, camera gets bumped, there's an earthquake, various things happen. Any movement of the camera is exaggerated in the video by the time-lapse nature of these clips. When they're sped up, even the slightest movement of the camera, which might not be noticeable at normal speed, can become very noticeable when it is sped up greatly. So I spend a lot of time stabilizing the clips after the fact with software, which makes them look as good as they look. I hope they look good. I'm going to illustrate that here in this close-up clip of the caulking, the famous caulking. Even though this clip isn't sped up, it's at normal speed, the camera is zoomed way in, which exacerbates any movement of the camera even more. This also illustrates another factor that happens sometimes. I never know what they're going to do. They don't tell me. And as in this case, I may notice something happening and react quickly and move a camera over to point at it. It takes some time after that to get the camera positioned and locked down, and also to let the camera's built-in stabilization recover from all the movement. Sometimes, as in this case, I wanted to include some of the all-important caulking that took place just after the camera was moved and it hadn't quite settled yet. So you'll see an especially large amount of stabilization occurring at the beginning of this clip. I'm going to replay this close-up with the stabilization activity exposed by disabling the zooming in that normally occurs to compensate for the stabilization so that you can see the difference that it makes. So, let's rewind the clip. Okay, we've rewound back to the beginning. Let's expose the stabilization at work. And by the way, the music in this clip is another instance where I originally used the instrumental version of the song, so just for fun I'll substitute in the version of the song with vocals while we rewatch this clip with stabilization exposed. This looks like a lot of hard work. They've been working on and off on these pavers in front of the building for literally over 3 months. Every once in a while they'll show up, work a little bit more, then they'll disappear and be gone for days or weeks. I never know when they're going to come back. As I said previously, I don't get any advance notice of what they're going to do, of course, or when they're going to do it. This is a case where I had to keep a camera pointed in this general direction just in case they showed up, or at least keep a watchful eye out if the camera is pointed somewhere else, just in case they showed up. This went on for months. I never know when they're going to finish those pavers. Often that camera would record many days of nothing. And what seems to happen an awful lot, more than the odds say it should, but you know, it's just because I notice it more, is just when I decide to point the camera somewhere else, then suddenly they'll show up and work there. It was uncanny how often that happened. It was almost like it was planned. Or the other thing that would happen is they'd start working just at the exact same time as a bunch of other interesting work was happening at the same place somewhere else. Giving me difficult choices as to where to point the cameras. How inconsiderate of them. Murphy's Law at work, I guess. Well, anyway, poor little old me, you know. Life is tough. In this case, though, I got him. Here we have another case of me using an instrumental version of a song that also has a version with vocals. In this case, the vocal version of the song is called He Ain't No Good. Didn't go along at all with the video because I'm not saying these guys are no good. They look fine to me. So I didn't want a song about, he ain't no good. A classic country song with a woman complaining about her man. But the instrumental version of this song I thought went really well with the video, so I used the instrumental version. But just for fun, I'll swap in a little bit of the version with vocals here. And remember, this is not, I repeat, not a comment on the guys in the video. Okay, now remember, that song was not meant to imply anything about the people in the video. Don't forget that. Now that we've made that clear, there's a point of interest coming up next in the video here, which is actually a point that I hope you did not notice in the original version, and that point will be coming up soon. Let's see if you notice it now that I've warned you about it. So, did you notice anything subtle there? Well, let's rewind back a bit and go forward slowly. Watch the difference between this frame and the next one. To make it even more obvious what happened, here are the two frames side by side. The thing to notice is that there was a jump there where something was cut out. Well, here's what was cut out. You see, they're working right by the street, so every once in a while a truck, a bus, or some other high vehicle will go by, blocking the view. When the clip is sped up, this can make the video difficult to watch, sort of a flashing or a strobe effect that's kind of annoying, as part of the view is blocked just momentarily. Might even set off someone with epilepsy, I suppose. So, I carefully cut out those places. Since the video is sped up anyway, the portions cut out are pretty brief, enough so that in most cases you don't even notice that it was done, and it makes the video easier to watch. In this case, though, that truck lingered there for quite a long time, making it more noticeable than most places. Just one more little thing that I do to enhance your viewing pleasure. This truck didn't block much of the view, so I left him in. I find that when you're watching a time-lapse, you sometimes lose track of how much time is passing. Is what you're watching minutes, hours, or what? The banner that I put at the top of some clips is my little attempt to add a timing perspective, in case you're wondering just how much time is really passing when you're watching that clip that's not normal speed. I don't know if that works for anyone, but it's just my little attempt to put the sped up clip into proper perspective time-wise. I don't really know why the fire department showed up in this clip. I'm assuming it was a false alarm since there's no smoke or fire visible and they didn't stay very long. I've heard that painting sometimes sets off the smoke detectors if they're spraying and the spray gets into the detector. That may be what happened here, but I don't really know. I can use this clip for another little editing lesson or insight. This clip was recorded very early in the morning when the sun is at a steep angle. The shadows of the nearby buildings cause this effect here where the left side is very bright in the direct sunlight, but the right side is in darkness. And of course the boundary between those two moves as the sun moves, something that's visible in a time-lapse. That's tough for photography, as the camera tries to strike a balance in the exposure between the bright side and the dark side. One of the tweaks I make to some of the videos to make it look better is I do some enhancing of this situation to bring up the dark side without causing too much over brightness on the bright side. The difference is subtle, but it makes a slight difference in the dark area. Not sure how much you'll notice, but here I'll turn off that enhancement. Now it's back on, now it's back off, now it's back on, now it's back off, now it's back on. And I don't know how much difference you could see there, but there is a subtle difference. Just another one of the many small things I do to enhance your viewing pleasure. This segment contains some, shall we say, cheesy special effects towards the end when I substitute the hospital construction channel logo for the sign that he's actually putting up. To make it look semi-realistic with his hands and arms over the inserted sign, I had to do a process called rotoscoping. This is a very tedious process where you go frame by frame and cut out the portions of one video that you want to be inserted into another. Here you can see my work for a few of the frames. This process can be very time-consuming, which is why if you look at the credits for some movies, you'll see a huge list of names credited with doing this sort of thing. Big budget movies probably have more sophisticated software than I do, plus they sometimes have the ability to shoot some of their action on green screens, but for some reason I couldn't get the workers down there to work in front of a green screen, so... It was particularly difficult for me because the video is sped up, which means each frame is significantly different from the prior frame, unlike a normal speed video where just small tweaks need to be made between each frame. I spent about 2 days working on this and only got about 4 seconds of video done, so I realized it was just going to take too long. So I gave up and I did the quick and dirty blurring approach that you see in the latter portion of this clip. So I would say that Industrial Light and Magic doesn't have anything to worry about in terms of competition for me. The first song here in Chapter 7 is another old standby, an old favorite that was used in quite a number of episodes. A few people have also commented that it's one of their favorites. It has a nice long build-up at the beginning, which is good for sunrises and moonsets, and long, slow zoom-ins and things like that. And then it morphs into pretty good music that fits in well with a time-lapse. So let's watch the moon set at the beginning of this clip with that old standard in the background. Hope you'll excuse me here while I interrupt the old standard for just a moment, because this clip brings up a chance to talk about some more editing topics. This clip is showing work at the top of the building, which is actually above the camera position. That black section in the upper left is actually the shadow of the window because I hurriedly pointed the camera that way and messed up a bit, but that's not what I wanted to talk about. Because the camera is pointed upwards a significant amount, it causes a keystone effect in the video, and in some clips I compensate for that during editing. I'll turn off that compensation now so that you can see the way that it looked originally. There it is. Now here they are side by side. Okay, now another editing topic. Most of the clips I do color correction. I adjust the exposure, brightness, and things like that to make them look good. Just one more thing I do for your viewing pleasure. This clip is a good example of a quandary I sometimes face. It was recorded early in the morning during sunrise when everything was sort of bathed in a golden glow from the sunrise. The camera sometimes even magnifies that golden hue even more. The dilemma I have is whether to color correct the clip to what the true colors of everything are, or do I leave that golden hue intact? Due to the nature and type of videos these are, they're not romantic videos or trying to evoke some sort of emotion, so I usually correct them to the true color, which is what I did in this clip. I'm going to show you over on the right side what the clip looked like from the camera without any color correction. And you can choose what you want to look at. Do you want to look at the neutral side, or do you want to look at the emotional heart-tugging side? Up to you. The second song in this clip is another favorite of mine. I don't know about anybody else's, but this is such a pretty song. I like it. It's been used a number of times in the past episodes. Not sure how well the song fits with this clip. Sort of fits, sort of doesn't, but I like the song, so I wanted to include it one last time. This is another case, yet another case, where I'm using the instrumental version of the song just because for these types of videos, instrumental seems to work best. But this song does have a vocal version as well, so just for fun, once again, I'm going to swap in the vocal version of this song.
Of the world I find, it's always looking deep into your eyes.
Stopping for a moment to interject here, of course the video is sped up greatly during the nighttime period because there's not that much to see then. It's actually sped up at 6,000 times normal speed. So it was kind of difficult to fit 6,000 up there in the speed display thingy, so I made it 6K. Looks a little weird, but hopefully people understand what it means. But the big thing to notice overnight is that there are a number of lights going on and off, and at one point you can even see some curtains close. So there are some people in this building overnight now in week 107, so watch for that. Now back to the pretty music that I so rudely interrupted.
So I sail on through
As it says there, this is the very last video of any construction related to the building that I captured, and it was another case where I'd been waiting a long time for them to come back and finish something. I had been waiting for 5 weeks for them to come back and finish replacing those last 2 lights. Trying to point cameras there, hoping I would catch it if they came back. The only reason I caught it is that this camera was pointing down at the pavers, and I had made the shot wide enough so that just in case someone came back to do those lights, I'd at least have some video of it, and sure enough they did. So if I zoom out, you can see what the original strategic pointing of that camera was. I wasn't around when they finally showed up to do this, otherwise I would have zoomed in for a closer shot. But anyway, try not to get too emotional here as we watch the very last construction related to the building that was captured by any camera. At the time this clip was recorded, early in week 108, I didn't know what construction there was left to see. I figured it was just about done. So I just had this one camera pointed in a very wide shot just in case anything happened. And something did happen down there, so as soon as I noticed it, I pointed a close-up camera at it, which is why this clip opens up with a wide shot and then transitions to a close-up. Turned out to be the very last construction of any kind that I captured. And I thought this kind of triumphant or inspirational music kind of went along with the final construction track. By the way, this close-up is another case where they're working next to the street and some of those frames blocked by high vehicles are cut out every now and then. See if you can spot them, maybe make it a drinking game. There's a behind-the-scenes story about this chapter. When editing the original episode, I went to retrieve the base time-lapse camera video file for this day, and to my horror found that it had somehow gone missing. All the other files were there from all the other days, but for some reason this one day's file was missing. Wouldn't you know it, the one day in week 110 when something happened and the file had somehow been deleted. I don't know how that happened, but I think someone must have broken in and deleted that one file. That's the only explanation. I can't think of anything else that could have happened. Yep, someone must have broken in and deleted that file when I wasn't looking. So I ran some disk recovery software to see if it could recover the deleted file. Now it's a big disk, so it took most of a day to run, but it managed to recover 2 pieces of the file, about 90% of the file, including the important part where something was happening. So I breathed a sigh of relief. Unfortunately, however, the video files were corrupt and not usable. So I sent those files off to a company that specializes in repairing corrupt video files, and they were actually able to fix them. I then stitched the 2 pieces back together, and voila, we have what you see here. So this chapter almost didn't happen. Another important thing to notice about this clip is the fact that tour buses are running again, a sign of hope. When the pandemic hit, those all stopped running. There were no more tour buses anymore. But lately, they're back running again, a little ray of light in these pandemic times, and that's a good thing. One minor thing that surprised me at the ceremony, because I hadn't read anything about the sculptures ahead of time, is that only the top half lights up. That surprised me. These are programmed to turn on 20 minutes before sunset and turn off 20 minutes before sunrise. I don't know if they adjust that because obviously sunset and sunrise change every day, so I don't know how close they keep that. By the way, the artist did not give these sculptures any title. They're officially untitled. They've gone a surprisingly long amount of time without any graffiti or vandalism. That surprised me, but just the other day I saw the first incidents of graffiti that I've noticed. Boy, I'm glad my cameras aren't that big. That would be awkward and annoying. I caught the aftermath of this accident purely accidentally, no pun intended, because the camera was still running after the sculpture lighting ceremony. At first I thought it was just some entitled person in an expensive car illegally parking to pick something up from the restaurant on the corner. But then I realized it was actually an accident. I never found any information in the news about this or what actually happened, but it seemed like the most police I've ever seen assemble for a relatively minor accident. Maybe because it was hit and run and there were actual witnesses, I don't know. Could just be me, but this looks like a bit of an awkward embrace here. Not sure how comfortable that bicyclist is with this hug. Perhaps because he's wearing a mask and the other guy isn't. I could be misinterpreting that, but the body language to me looks like that's a bit of an awkward embrace. Here's a spot where it will be fun to look at the stabilization again. We looked at this previously. Here's a spot where there actually was a handheld camera in use. This camera has Mondo stabilization, but even so, in this case it was zoomed way and pointed far away, so the slightest movement of the camera was pretty major deal, but stabilization in the camera did what it could, but it can only do so much. So stabilization was applied afterwards. So I'm going to show 3 versions of the clip here. In the upper left is what was actually shown in the episode, the end result. The upper right shows the stabilization exposed and at work. And the bottom clip is the actual video from the camera, which shows my unsteady hand. This is the first time I can ever recall seeing the highway patrol on this street. It is technically a U.S. highway, so it is under state jurisdiction, so I guess that's why. I've just never seen it before. Some interesting trivia: because of that, whenever there's construction done on this street, it has to be approved by both the city and the state. There were plans way back in the 1940s and 1950s to turn this street into a full-blown freeway, but that never happened, and it's certainly never going to happen now. Looks like that car is a bit too low to the ground to be dragged around by two-wheel towing, so they call in a flatbed tow truck. The car looked perfectly drivable to me. I couldn't really see all that much damage. Not sure why it had to be towed, but I suppose there could be damage that I couldn't see. My original plan here was just a plain old time-lapse showing buses using the new bus lanes. Then I decided to point out a few violators who weren't supposed to be there, and then I noticed how many of them there were, so I decided to have some fun and make a whole thing out of it, pointing them all out. During construction, a lot of bicyclists, skateboarders, scooter riders, a host of other people got used to using those lanes before they were open. I've read that when the buses finally started running in them, the police made a special effort to catch and educate people still doing it, but I haven't really seen much evidence of that. I can only ever recall one case where I've ever seen the police stop someone for being in those lanes, and in this case he just forced the van to move out of the lane, but didn't issue any ticket or anything like that. There was kind of a sad case a while back before the lanes opened when a motorcyclist was fooling around, showing off, driving fast up those lanes, actually on the wrong side of the street, and ended up running into some construction equipment and died. If you take a look in the background of this clip, up the street, you'll see a truck parked up there in the middle of the street, blocking one of the only 2 lanes available and causing all sorts of traffic headaches for people. Of course, I don't really know if that truck is actually delivering potato vodka. It could just be an advertising sign on the side of the truck that has nothing to do with the delivery. But still, I like to imagine all the residents gathered around a table somewhere drinking potato vodka. By the way, the red brick building that you see behind the building in many of these shots is, I believe, what is called a clergy house, where priests or ministers live. This neighborhood is known as Cathedral Hill because a number of churches were built here way back in history. Building churches on hills seems to be a thing. Anyway, there are a number of churches, church offices, church buildings, and so forth around here. This next series of shots was taken from the hill behind the building, specifically in the parking lot of this tall condo building you see in the background. Unfortunately, I don't know anyone who lives in that building because there could have been some great shots from up there. The highest point I could get to was their parking lot, and I was technically trespassing, I suppose, but I was only there for a short time and no one seemed to care. And yes, there is part of a church in the foreground. Also, by the way, in case you hadn't guessed it, there's a pool up at the top of the building. I'm imagining the residents sitting around the pool sipping potato vodka. I do have to wonder if one of the priests or ministers made this sign. I don't know. Okay, let's take one last excursion into the editing world here. First, some background. Most of the numerous cameras used during this series are regular video cameras. The video is then, in most cases, sped up time-lapse style during editing. Purists, though, will say that this is not a time-lapse because a true time-lapse is a camera taking photos at some interval, not sped up video. And while that may technically be true, the effect is basically the same, so I don't distinguish between those two things, and I call them all time lapses, and I think people understand. However, there is one camera involved in this series that is indeed taking a true time-lapse. That's the camera that I sometimes refer to as the base time-lapse camera. You may have seen me or heard me mention that on occasion. This is the camera that runs 24 hours and takes these wide shots that you see from time to time in the series. There's a thing that sometimes happens with time-lapses. Because the camera takes one independent photo at a time, if automatic exposure is used, each photo will have slightly different exposure depending on what the lighting is like at the time that individual photograph was taken. Then when all the individual photos are put together to make a continuous video, this can sometimes cause a flickering effect because some frames are brighter than others and some are darker, and so it flickers. And that sometimes happens here. To fix that, I run the footage from the base time-lapse camera through some de-flickering software. It's a pretty CPU-intensive process, so even given the short segment that you're about to see, that took like 30 minutes or so of CPU time to de-flicker. To illustrate this, I'm going to split the screen, and the left half is the final finished version that you saw in the original episode, while the right half is the original video before de-flickering was applied.
Crack on, give it all you got. Crack on, give it your best shot. Crack on, crack on, crack on. Keep your powder dry. Crack on, and your spirits high. Crack on, crack on. Now crack on. Through the thick and thin, crack on. In your bulletproof skin, crack on. Crack on. 'Cause every time you feel like giving up, crack on. Every time you feel...
This S-series started just about the same time as the pandemic in early 2020. I didn't have much to do, couldn't go anywhere, everything was locked up, so I had lots of time to work on it, so it was very convenient, I guess you could say. Not that anyone wants a pandemic, or that it's convenient, of course, but it worked out for me. The timing was good. I know you've probably heard it before, but it takes a long time to make these episodes. Way more than 40 hours of work goes into each week's episode. I know, we've all heard content creators whine about how much time it takes them to make an episode, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, as the pandemic loosened up a bit and I started having other things to do, I got behind a bit making the episodes, but all 96 of them are done now. I appreciate all the comments and the support along the way. It's been very gratifying and nice to see that people enjoy it. I hope the episodes will live on, sort of like a legacy of sorts, I suppose. Someday, hundreds of years from now, maybe someone will start a new series of videos about whatever building replaces this one, and maybe they'll incorporate some of my video, which will then be historical video from the olden days. I wonder if YouTube will still be around then, or if there will be something else. Maybe people will be publishing holograms then or something, I don't know. Anyway, many have asked what's next, and I appreciate the support and the desire for more. Believe me, I do, but I can't really answer that question right now. At one time, there was a proposal to build a new 13-story residential building catacornered across from this one very close by. Had plans drawn up and everything, but that eventually fizzled out. As far as I know, that proposal's dead. I also heard rumors of a new building going up next door to the Tesla dealer that you sometimes see in these videos, but that was quite a while ago, and I haven't seen any evidence of that yet. My understanding is that it is pretty tough to get a building approved in San Francisco, and also the economic climate makes it tough to build a residential building. In fact, the building we've been watching was originally going to be a regular condo building, but those plans were canceled due to economic concerns, and this senior residential building was built instead. So that's a long answer, but basically I have a few more videos to do, such as an overall traditional time-lapse covering the entire period, perhaps some more detailed videos about the tower cranes, because videos about tower cranes are always popular, and a few other things too. Eventually, however, this channel will probably be going dormant for some amount of time, as it did after the completion of the original H series of videos. I need a break, and I'm anxious to get back to my other channel called Party of the Third Part, and maybe do some drive lapses, interviews, San Francisco events, a few other things, I don't know. In this last section here, I thought about listing some of the many fans, but I figured I'd probably accidentally leave someone out that deserved to be there, so I didn't do it. But you all know who you are, and I know who you are, and I thank you for staying with me. Hope it was worth it. As I said earlier in this video, I had heard that there was going to be a restaurant going into the ground floor of the building. But it turns out it's going to be one of those members-only la-di-da concierge medicine places. They've been doing an awful lot of concrete pours inside there lately, not sure why. I'm guessing maybe because they're going to have MRI machines and CAT scan machines in there. Maybe they need a lot of concrete for that, but I don't really know. Take care, everyone. I won't say farewell because there will still be more videos coming on this channel and others. I'll leave you with some footage of the concrete pours that are happening down below, even though you can't actually see the destination of all that concrete.